Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Searing. I'm the Director of External Relations here with the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. We will be starting our webinar shortly. Just a friendly reminder to everyone that we will be recording this morning's webinar. And it's been a little bit for some of us, so forgive us as we work through any technical bumps in the road. Okay. And with that, is my pleasure to introduce everyone, to everyone, Rick Essenberg, our president here at the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty.
Well, thank you, Eric. And thanks to everyone for attending this morning's webinar. You know, I think that the fact that we're even holding this end of session review is an important development in the evolution of the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. We began as a litigation group. I think everybody knows how active we are in the litigation area. We've grown to be one of the largest and most prolific state-based freedom-oriented litigation centers in the country. We are very gratified by that. But at some point in this process, we came to realize that we couldn't litigate our way to the world that we'd like to see. And so we added a top-rate policy component. We became more fully a think tank. And we have produced over the last, I don't know, 6 or 7, maybe 8 years, compelling policy analysis and reports. Our most recent investigation of the 2020 election was heralded by the Wall Street Journal editorial page as the best analysis of the 2020 election that had been done to date. I'm very pleased again to be able to take credit for that. I didn't do much of the work, I have to tell you. I helped to write the conclusions, but the great analysis and sort of impartial and rigorous examination of the election that we found in that report was the great work of people like Kyle Kanan, who you'll hear from later this morning, Will Flanders, our research director, Corey Peterson, Miranda Spint, just a host of my very talented and extremely hardworking colleagues. We've also, I think, come to the conclusion that we need to engage with the legislature from time to time. Now, as a C3 organization, our ability to do that is, of course, limited. I should reiterate again that we don't do electoral politics. We don't advocate for or against candidates for public office. But we do have an ability to attempt to engage with the legislature and policymakers and try to work to help the good ideas that come out of our litigation efforts and our policy research become law. And over the last 2 years or so, we've emphasized that to a greater degree. Last year, during the legislative session, we engaged with the legislature on more than 30 bills. It was not a legislative session that was likely to produce a lot of enacted law on the issues that we care about. We had split government, although the legislature passed a number of things that we were supportive of, with one exception, a public transparency bill. Governor Evers, which you'll hear about, Governor Evers vetoed that legislation. In fact, of the 100 bills that Governor Evers vetoed during the last session, Will engaged, helped craft about 14 of them. And I think that that is a wonderful testament to the growing impact that our policy team has in Madison and beyond. So once again, I find myself in a position where, and I repeat this again and again and again, but it's a good line, so I'm going to say it once more, maybe for the 136th time that Libby and Kyle here have heard it, that I've reached a point in life where a great deal of my job is taking credit for the tremendous work of younger people. And what I want to do now is turn this session over to those younger people so you can hear about the fantastic work that they've done. And so it's my pleasure, and it really is a pleasure. I say that with all sincerity, to introduce two of my favorite people. Libby Sobek is one of our lawyers. She is the director of our education project. She is the force behind our policy team. Kyle Kanan is as well. He is our policy director. Both Libby and Kyle headed up this effort. And I join the rest of you in looking forward to be able to hear about what they did during this last legislative session, what was accomplished, what was not accomplished, perhaps most importantly, what can be accomplished going forward. So with that, I turn it over to Libby and Kyle.
Well, thank you, Rick, for that very kind introduction, and welcome to everyone to our webinar on Will's policy successes over the last legislative session. We are going to be breaking this up into two sections. We'd like to review this past year and talk a little bit about our successes, some of the challenges we experienced, and then we'll conclude with really a discussion of a preview on Will's 2023 agenda and where we think Will be engaging, hopefully with the new governor and a stronger legislature. Before we jump in, I just want to remind our attendees that there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit questions as we present. We will answer them as we go along, and we also have some time saved at the end to discuss any questions that you may have. So with that, I'm going to kick us off and talk about my favorite topic, K12 Education Reform, and the work that we were able to do with the help of our strong leadership in Madison this past session. We were immensely proud and quite honestly, a little shocked that our public school spending transparency bill was signed into law by Governor Evers. It is now called Act 89, and it's a really critical first step in making sure that we are creating as much transparency as possible on how taxpayer dollars are going into our school districts, where that money is being spent, to hopefully lead us to a place to have a conversation about efficiency. Where are we seeing successes with our dollars? What districts are doing a better job with the dollars they're receiving? These are questions we can't answer today, but Act 89 is the first critical step to get that process started. What that bill did was create a commission of legislature and taxpayers to come together and build a report for DPI. DPI then has to go in front of the Joint Finance Committee and be really clear about what they are planning to do and what they are potentially saying they can't do. This is a bill that encourages legislative oversight as well as input from our public school community to make sure that we're building something that's sustainable and that's going to be helpful to all taxpayers across the state. Unfortunately, we were not as successful with a lot of other bills that we were really proud to lead on. Wisconsin passed the first curriculum transparency bill in the nation. Will was really proud to work with our friends at the Goldwater Institute out of Arizona and over 30 parents who came to testify in support of this bill. Governor Evers vetoed this bill, claiming that it would have caused too much work for our public school teachers and administrators. And I think that that's really reflective of how he doesn't understand where parents are today and their real interest in finding out what's happening in the classroom and being able to be treated as an equal partner in their child's education. Similarly, Governor Evers vetoed bills like the Parent Bill of Rights and universal school choice and charter school expansion. These bills would have ensured that more students across the state of Wisconsin could have accessed high quality education. It would have made it easier for our charter schools to open up around the state. And most importantly, it would have empowered parents to ensure that they had the ability to go into their public schools and be treated as equals. However, as disappointed as we are that Evers vetoed these bills, not to fear, these are things that remain a priority for Will, and we look forward to reintroducing these to hopefully a different governor in 2023. I'll now kick it over to my colleague Kyle for him to talk about some of our other topics.
Thanks, Libby. So as Rick mentioned in his introduction, we spent about 10 months working on a review of the 2020 election. And this report had a lot of impact in the legislature. We ended up working with the legislature to craft a number of bills that we had recommended as part of our review. Some of those mirrored some of the recommendations that the Legislative Audit Bureau made in their review of the election. So at the end of this session, we had about 7 will-supported bills that got passed and were eventually vetoed by Governor Evers. Some of those include a Havlicek bill. I'm going to go into further detail on some of these as we look forward to next session because, as I stated, all these were vetoed. So I can kind of go through what our priorities are when it comes to election integrity a little later here. But we had a Havlicek bill. We had some bills that added more oversight to how WEC operates. And then if you're familiar with the Zucker-Bucks issue and CTCL private funding of election administration, we also supported some legislation on that as well. And then we also, Will has a lot of expertise in a lot of different areas. We were thrilled to be invited by a number of the committee chairs in the legislature to come testify on a various number of issues. I'll let Libby kind of touch on the first 2, and then I can kind of pick up on the other 2.
Yes, we have been really pleased that both our litigation work and our policy work has been recognized by the legislature and many chairs of committees that we are a wealth of knowledge for them. I was able to testify regarding an issue with Milwaukee Public Schools and that they were not providing transportation to private school students, which was not only a violation of the requirements under the law, but they were claiming the pandemic excuses. And I was able to testify to the committee and make sure that they understood that there was not an excuse for MPS on this place. And that testimony and that committee hearing forced MPS to come to the negotiation table, and we were able to resolve the issue successfully. Additionally, my colleague Will Flanders, our research director on staff, he was able to testify about how DPI were playing games with the report cards and what it meant moving forward for the state from a research standpoint, and how difficult it was going to be for schools and parents to know exactly how well our students were doing. He was a key part of that hearing because he followed DPI and was able to really do some myth busting on what DPI was saying and help the committee understand what the real impact would be from a data perspective by these changes.
Yeah, and just last month, I was invited to go testify before the Assembly Committee on Licensing Reform. There's been some coverage lately of the Department of Safety and Professional Services, our state's licensing agency, having a giant backlog of license applications with some people waiting up to 9 months to receive their license. So we released a report shortly before the hearing kind of outlining the issue and some suggestions for reform. So we were invited to testify and kind of set the stage for the hearing. And then also earlier this year, Rick, myself, and our research director, Will Flanders, were invited to the Senate Committee on Elections to come testify on our review of the 2020 election. And I think we spent a good almost 2 hours talking to the committee and working through some of the issues that we had found with the election. In addition to bills and offering our expert testimony to legislative committees, we've also engaged on a number of regulatory issues. And one of the biggest wins we've had regulatory-wise was yesterday, actually. We successfully got the legislature to suspend a rule that effectively banned short-term rental owners like on Airbnb and VRBO from renting out their house with a pool or a hot tub. The Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection hasn't adjusted their standards to allow that to happen. So we successfully lobbied them and they took action yesterday. And we now have pool freedom in Wisconsin for this foreseeable future, at least. Libby, I don't know if you want to touch on the DPI rule.
Yeah, I think what we understand is that agency bureaucrats have a lot of power, and it's really important that we're really tracking what they're trying to do because the legislature has a lot on their plate. And so one of the things that we were able to provide was work with our friends at School Choice Wisconsin regarding DPI's rule on specific learning disabilities. These changes would have negatively impacted private schools, and it would have made it a lot harder for students at private schools to be found to need additional services. Our work with School Choice Wisconsin resulted in not only an amended rule, but really a process that helped engage our legislature to understand these really complex issues. And so this regulatory oversight and engaging our legislative allies to really make sure that they're tracking these complex issues has been a real win for Will, and something that I think we'll continue to do.
And I'll just touch briefly. We also submitted comment earlier this session on a DWD rule that would have suspended work search requirements for unemployment insurance. As a result of our comment and many others who commented on the bill, JCRER, which is the committee that oversees rulemaking in the legislature, suspended that rule as well.
So now we're going to transition to the second part of this presentation and really talk about where Will is going into 2023. Right now, the legislature has concluded its session. Many of our allies are out campaigning. As you certainly know, we have a contested gubernatorial race. And so we're really looking at what is January 2023 going to look like when we have new leadership and many new faces in our legislature. This discussion is really a preview of where we're going. We expect this to continue to expand and be adapted, but we're really excited to look forward to the opportunities for Wisconsin in 2023. So I'm going to kick it off again with our K12 overview. We have been so proud to do some of the most comprehensive research on K12 in the state of Wisconsin. And we're really excited to work with our allies across the state to achieve what we see are three critical goals for the state of Wisconsin. The first is to expand educational options for all students. Right now, about 1 in 6 students use school choice across the state. We'd love to see that number go up even higher. So this includes expanding our existing school choice voucher programs, deregulating them so it's easier for schools and families to participate. This includes expanding charter schools so they can reach more alternative public school options across the state. And this also includes thinking about other ways that we can offer educational options to our families, whether that's public school open enrollment or making it easier for innovation to happen in our public schools. The second critical topic that we see in 2023 is empowering parents. The pandemic silver lining, without a doubt, is that parents have been more engaged than ever in their school boards and in their schools. We really want to make sure that we're building on that engagement and interest by ensuring parents are treated as equal partners in their child's education. That includes our bills like the Parent Bill of Rights, curriculum transparency, and many other ideas of making sure parents are empowered to have the control and oversight of their children's education. Last, but certainly not least, Will really believes that amending Wisconsin's school finance system is critical to expanding to the next stage of school choice. Right now, students are funded based off of the door they walk through. Their value changes depending on what school door they walk through, rather than being reflective of that student's individual characteristics. We really believe that we need to create educational funding parity for our various programs like public charter schools and vouchers. And we also need to review how we're funding our public school districts. Out of the 421 school districts across the state, funding ranges from $10,000 per student to up to $21,000 per student, with really no rhyme or reason. One of the ways that we're starting to educate our friends and allies on this topic is our school scorecard. Please feel free to check it out if you haven't. It can be reached at knowmyschoolwisconsin.com. It's also on Will's homepage. This is a great tool to see how every school district in the state is funded, and really helps users understand the complex nature of our school funding formula, and certainly gives a preview to the need for reform.
Thanks, Libby. As I stated earlier, we engaged on a number of election integrity forums. I think this list kind of touches on some of the big picture items that we focused on. I fully expect this to expand in different ways and kind of have different iterations of the bills that were presented in the legislature this year. But I'll quickly run through these and kind of give a high level overview of each one of these. So one of the first things that we recommended in our report this year was WEC has, the Wisconsin Election Commission has a lot of problems with staff capture. A lot of the people who work there are holdovers from the GAB, and the commissioners who are bipartisan in nature, we have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, really have to listen to a lot of the legal advice that's given to them. One of the ways we saw to help fix this problem of taking action on bad legal advice is to introduce this idea of bipartisan legal counsel, where the 3 commissioners of each party would have their own legal counsel that could help guide them through some of the legal questions that came up during the election. One of the other issues that came up is the Wisconsin Election Commission issued guidance to a number of clerks around the state, and while this wasn't legally binding as guidance, most of the clerks adopted this guidance. And this could be on things from indefinitely confined voters, ballot curing, and drop boxes. So one of the things we proposed here was requiring the agency, when they issue communications to all the clerks, to submit that to the legislature, because then the legislature can determine whether or not that communication kind of meets the definition of a rule, and that would allow it to go through the rules process and allow public input and legislative input. One of the common themes we saw in our review was that the standards across the state were not uniform. We have 1,853 different municipal clerks in the state. It's fairly impossible to believe that they can all do the things exactly the same unless we really spell it out in the law. So we advocate for uniform curing practices, uniform in-person absentee hours, and other things along those lines. The voter rolls also were a big issue. The ERIC database, which the state subscribes to, is supposed to identify movers that move across state lines or move within the state. The Wisconsin Election Commission is not using the information that ERIC provides as reliable information to remove voters or move them to an inactive status. So one of the bills would require them to do that. We also have this issue of DMV checks. So when you register to vote, your information is bumped up against the DMV driver's license database, and we see these mismatches happening. So we identified about 20,000 mismatches in the state of Wisconsin, and a lot of these can be are relatively innocuous. They can be things like a Jim versus a James, where you have common variations in the name, or transcription errors. One of the problems we have right now is that clerks don't even get to see what the mismatch is and try to correct that. So this bill would create a process to really get our voter rolls accurate, and then remove those folks that aren't meeting any of the matching criteria. One other issue that we've had here at Will is when you want to go file a complaint against WEC or a clerk, the first step in doing so, you have to stop at WEC and have them review that complaint. So one of the things we advocate for here, it's kind of like the fox guarding the hen house here. So one of the things we advocate for here is changing that WEC complaint process, where if you have a problem with WEC or a complaint against WEC, you can bypass their complaint process and go straight to circuit court. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the CTCL funding with the Zuckerbucks issue, Wisconsin got about $10.3 million in funding from this organization called CTCL. It was divvied out to different municipalities, with the top 5 in the state getting about $8.8 million total. We saw in our reporting that had an effect of swinging the election about 8,000 votes towards Biden. So one of the things we advocate for here is banning that practice of using private dollars for the administration of elections. And then lastly, one thing I wanted to touch on here is I think we can have a lot more transparency in our election records. There are a number of things that the public should have greater access to so they can really hold their election officials accountable. Also quickly touch on these. We did some work on regulatory reform earlier this session. Our Bradley Freedom Fellow, Adam Hoffer, released a report that kind of gave an overview of Wisconsin's regulatory state right now. Right now, we have about 12.25 million words in the administrative code. We have the largest per capita regulatory burden in the Great Lakes states region. So what's really needed to really get at this problem, we can continue kind of hitting specific issues like we did with the pools, but we need structural reforms that will give legislators and the public, more certainty in how the rulemaking process happens. So we proposed a number of different things earlier this year. I'll kind of just touch on a couple of these quick. So automatic sunsetting is a really big idea. What you would do is you'd basically set the administrative code up, chapters of the administrative code from different agencies up on a schedule for them to be reviewed periodically. You would automatically sunset those unless the legislature takes an affirmative action to reintroduce those regulations. And then the other one, net zero regulatory budgeting. So when rules are written at the state level, they get basically an economic impact associated with them. So what this proposal would say is that you cannot introduce a new regulation that puts an impact on the regulated community without repealing something that has the same economic impact. And I'll briefly touch on our healthcare priorities that we're in the process of developing. So we recently launched a partnership with the Texas Public Policy Foundation to work together on healthcare issues. And we kind of have three primary buckets we're looking at. Price transparency. So I think this is a really big problem for healthcare consumers. Markets really don't work unless you know what you're paying for. So one of the things we'd like to see introduced in the state of Wisconsin is a way for people to kind of shop around their medical services, and price transparency is a big part of that. We'd also like to see medical professionals who are fully qualified to have their scope, have the ability to practice at the top of their scope. And then I think there's some reforms that we'd like to see implemented that make it easier for patients to access direct care. This can be expanding telehealth and models like direct primary care. And then
go ahead, Kyle.
Go ahead, Debbie, I'm sorry.
I'd say the last subject that we wanted to touch on was economic freedom and opportunity. And this is a little bit different than just the regulatory reforms. We really want to think about how has the state created barriers for individuals to access more careers, to expand their employment options. And this is really often driven by agency bureaucrats. And the best example of that is number one is deregulating the teacher licensure process. We released a report called Let Them Teach, where we compared Wisconsin's process to be a teacher from undergraduate to getting into the classroom. We compared Wisconsin's process to many other states, and we found that Wisconsin's was immensely complicated, very expensive, and it was honestly a barrier for us to recruit teachers from out of state. And so we really think that starting with deregulating the teacher licensure process would be a massive win for the teacher pipeline challenges that Wisconsin is facing, but also ensure that we're getting high quality educators into our schools, creating natural pipelines from people who are already invested in our schools' communities and helping them get into the classroom and reach their highest potential in employment.
And the second point here really goes to the point that I was talking about with some of the regulatory issues. We want to encourage the state legislature to fully use the powers they have to hold agency bureaucrats accountable. We see that when unchecked, agency bureaucrats really restrict freedom and restrict the ability of people to make a living. So I think at a high level, that's something we're going to be looking at. One of my colleagues, Dan Lennington, released a report in the midst of in the middle of the pandemic that kind of looked at ways we can reform our emergency powers laws to make them more accountable and easier to understand. So, and then kind of the last big point I'll touch on, occupational licensing. We've done a lot of research over the years. There are a lot of restrictions in state law that prevent people from really pursuing a career of their choice. And we're looking at some big structural reforms to reform those. I think I'll just touch on a couple of them. Universal license recognition is a big thing that we're hoping to get implemented next year or next session. This would basically allow anyone with a license in good standing from another state to move here to Wisconsin without having to jump through a million hoops to get their license. And then we also want to look at some of these other systematic kind of methods to review the regulations we have on the book for occupational licenses, and also create, that'd be kind of a sunset review where we would go systematically look at every single license that's on the book, determine whether or not the license itself is necessary to protect public health and safety, and also whether or not some of the regulations that govern that license are needed to do so as well. So sunrise reviews, kind of, it's the same concept, but done when a new license is proposed in the legislature. Would have kind of this thorough analysis that would kind of examine all of these issues. So, and I'll just kind of leave it here. I think we have more to come. We're developing our agenda throughout the year here. So definitely stay tuned.
I just want to, before we jump into Q&A, I just wanted to also add for many of our attendees, if there's topics that we didn't cover or issues that you think would fit into any of these buckets, we'd love to hear from you. So many of our policy initiatives are based on the work that we've done, whether we hear from donors or stakeholders or taxpayers who are dealing with issues. And so we really hope that this work is building on the work that our friends and colleagues and our litigation and our friends and colleagues in the policy teams are already doing.
And just a reminder to everybody, we have a little time here for Q&A, and just to get things kicked off, Libby, this question is for you. We know a number of education reform, as you stated, a number of education reform bills were passed by the legislature and sent to the governor's desk. And the question I think a lot of people want to know is, why did the education governor veto so many education-related bills?
Well, it's a great question, Eric. I can tell you what Evers said in his veto messages, and then I can kind of give you my reaction. Often the governor cited the overly complex education environment that Wisconsin already has. I would not use those terms to describe school choice. He often cited the proposed bills would have a financial impact on how we fund our schools and sectors. And quite frankly, that's an area that I agree with him, but my solution would be to fix those problems so that way families really understand where their money is going. And last but not least, he used a line that was pretty confusing, to be honest, where he would say these bills were designed to pit parents against schools. And I think it's a really good reflection that Governor Evers has aligned himself with the public school establishment and not with parents. And he was unable to see that bills like the Parent Bill of Rights or even our universal school choice legislation would have actually helped parents and engaged them with their local schools and honestly made the state of education better across the state. While his vetoes were disappointing and not surprising, we are certainly not dissuaded from continuing to advocate for these bills.
I guess I can just add on to that with the election reforms too. I'll read this directly from Governor Evers' veto messages on every single one of the election bills that pass. And I guess he argued that the passage would leave the right to vote, quote, subject to the whims of politicians who do not like the outcome of an election. So I think that is actually kind of rich. I think a lot of these bills that came out and made it their way through the legislature would do the exact opposite by adding certainty and uniformity to how the laws are applied across the state. And I'll just point to the fact that spring 2020, if we remember back to that, the day before the spring election, the governor ended up attempting to cancel the election or postpone it due to COVID. And I think that's a prime example of an election being held at the whims of a politician. Thankfully, that that decision was not upheld and the election moved forward. But I think it's kind of talking out of both sides of the mouth.
And another question that just came in was, how can folks best share the information that we're providing here? What are some important tools that we have at folks' disposal to look at our work and stay up to date on our education work and our policy work and our litigation?
So I'd say first and foremost, going to our website at will-law.org. Our website is a comprehensive resource that includes a list of all of our litigation in our cases, our policy work. In particular, I would say that you should sign up for Will's emails, because we are really providing overviews and updates on all of our work, and you can sign up for our emails at our website. Additionally, following us on social media is a great way to get live updates, either Twitter or Facebook, but we really try to make sure that we're very transparent about the work that we're doing, the successes we're having, and would definitely love for you to follow us in any ways that you do.
Great. And Rick, how can people support the great work that we're doing in terms of our policy and our litigation work?
Well, we don't charge our clients, and we are entirely dependent on, occasionally we'll get attorney's fees awarded to us in a case we win, but that's not available in most of our cases, and we don't select our cases with that in mind. We're really concerned mostly about advancing the law in the way we want to. And the same thing can be said of our policy work. So we are entirely dependent upon the generosity of our partners. You can go to our website and donate there. You can contact our development director, Leslie Lures, Leslie at will-law.org. You can contact me. We are very, very grateful and very, very gratified by the strong support that our partners provide us. And it wouldn't be possible without the support of so many people who ask for nothing, but that we do our best work to advance the public interest in the rule of law, limited government, free markets, individual liberty, and a robust civil society.
Great. And one final question, Rick, is Will's work focused to the state of Wisconsin, or we're busy in other venues now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, for the most part, we began as a Wisconsin-based organization, and we are always going to be a Wisconsin-based organization. I think if you look at state-based think tanks, state-based litigation centers around the country, we've been able to have an impact over the past 10 years in this state that really is unique. At the same time, because of the infrastructure that we've built, because we have such an exceptional group of professionals, we are increasingly called upon to do work in other areas. So, for example, I mean, a lot of our policy work, it gets noticed across the country. It was about Wisconsin, but people look at it in states like, Mississippi and Tennessee, and they say, well, look, we could do the same thing here. Let's work with those folks up at Will and see if we can't replicate that and accomplish the same good purposes down here in our state. And so our work in that sense is replicable and scalable. Increasingly in litigation, we find ourselves litigating outside of Wisconsin. Last year, we stopped the Biden administration from handing out $14 billion in government relief funds based upon the color of the recipient's skin. That case, for a variety of complicated reasons, we brought down in Tennessee. Recently, we sued Comcast for a grant program, which was also available to recipients based only upon the color of their skin. And that case is pending out of state as well.
Great. Well, with that, I just want to thank everybody that joined us for the webinar this morning. And I want to say thank you to Libby, Kyle, and Rick for making time for everyone and taking questions. And with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Just a reminder, though, this has been recorded and a copy of this will be available. So if there's anything that we covered today that you missed, you'll be able to go to YouTube and take a look at a copy of the recording. Again, thank you everyone for joining us this morning and have a great day.